My soul lifts up the Lord. My spirit celebrates God, my liberator. For though I'm God's humble servant, God has noticed me. Now and forever I will be considered blessed by all generations. For the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is God's name. From generation to generation, God's loving kindness endures for those who revere him. God's arm has accomplished mighty deeds. The proud in mind and heart, God has sent away in disarray. The rulers from their high positions of power, God has brought down low. And those who were humble and lowly, God has elevated with dignity. The hungry, God has filled with fine food. The rich, God has dismissed with nothing in their hands. To Israel, God's servant, God has given help. As promised to our ancestors, remembering Abraham and his descendants in mercy forever. Amen. You may be seated. One of the things that I love about being a part of the church is the seasons, the liturgical seasons. Much like the weather seasons, where we go from winter to spring to summer to fall, we have our own seasons in the church. I'm sure many of you have noticed the big purple banners, right? Those signify Advent. The purple is the color for that. But unlike most of our liturgical seasons in the church, Advent is celebrated kind of outside the church as well. Everywhere you look, people are preparing for Christmas. The mall does not decorate when we switch from Pentecost to ordinary time. But the mall does decorate as we prepare for Christmas time. Inside the church and outside the church, in our time in history, in our culture, everyone, it seems, is counting down to Christmas. City buses have the marquee read season's greetings. Radio stations change the music that they play. And anything that can be wrapped in lights, or sprinkled with glitter, or covered with green paper, or tied up with a big red bow, is usually wrapped with lights and sprinkled with glitter, and put up in green paper and tied with a big red bow. All of this during the month of December. Everywhere you look, there are symbols of the season. There are symbols counting down to Christmas. And one of those is the Christmas tree. Growing up in my house, there were two Christmas trees. One was a very small tree that was white and had a whole bunch of perfectly coordinated ornaments that matched all of the decor in my mom's formal living room. We did not help decorate that tree, and presents did not go underneath that tree. And ironically enough, this is the only picture of that tree in known existence. Something that is obscured by a little human named Ella, who is one of my parents' honorary grandchildren. So we don't even have like a real picture of that tree. It's tiny and it's just pretty. When I look at that tree, there's no emotional attachment to anything on it. The ornaments are shiny, but they're not precious in any way. But this is kind of a better idea, this grand, beautiful, kind of magazine-esque kind of idea about what a Christmas tree should look like. But we also had a second tree, and that one was filled with all of our, let's say, more creative ornaments. It had all of these things that were given to us by different loved ones that we made, all kinds of stuff. For example, this one was made by me in second grade. That's my lovely yearbook picture. And as you can see in all my 7-year-old wisdom, I decided to switch the green and red on the paper mosaic wreath. Why? I still couldn't tell you. And then I also have these that I made with loved ones. This is one that's made out of salt dough, and you now have the recipe on the back of that tree page. And I made it while sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table. Now, I think that this is supposed to be a rocking horse, but I can't be sure. And in the 9:30 service, we came up with several ideas, perhaps a weenie dog on skis. There are several options you could go with. I'll let you do your own creative interpretation. But regardless, I remember sitting at that table and making these ornaments and sharing in that love and fellowship with people I loved dearly as we counted down to Christmas. So that fancy room tree, I don't remember anything. I look at those ornaments, and that's all that they are. They're ornamental. They are simply decorations. But if I look at that other tree, it's more than just decorations. I see ornaments, but I feel memories. Each one triggers something: a person, a place, a time, a feeling. So when I became an adult, I kept the tradition of getting an ornament, or a couple of ornaments, each year that helps me to remember something that had happened. And so as I unpack my ornaments each year, I relive those memories. It's a way for me to remember and to just have it all visually represented on a tree once a year. So this next one represents a trip I made with a dear friend. That was a really good time in Corpus Christi. And this one, I cut out a card that was given to my first foster son on his first birthday by a dear friend. And this one was made at an ornament making party I hosted during graduate school. And this one was made out of a very large bead from one of my granny's necklaces. And so when I look at my tree, it's a mix of emotions. And sometimes all of the good, wonderful, joyous memories that I see are eclipsed by profound grief. My first foster son has returned to his birth family. Those few months with him were all that I got. There won't be another birthday. There was never a Christmas, and there never will be one. I rarely get to see my friends from graduate school in Austin. People who I loved so dearly that I spent so much time with, I now rarely even get to have a conversation with. And both of my grandmothers have passed away. Never again will I have an ornament that was given to me from them. And more painfully, I'll never get to make one with them again. So when I'm flooded with these kinds of emotions, this is not the happiest time of the year, despite what the radio tells me. I'm grateful for the memories. I'm grateful for the love and time shared with these amazing humans with whom I got to walk through life, if even for just a season. But I also mourn the loss. And to make these feelings worse, I feel like I'm obligated to be happy. It's Advent, not Sadvent. I'm supposed to just put a smile on my face and sing songs and maybe wear a tacky sweater and bake some gingerbread. The scripture that I read was from Mary's Magnificat. And the Magnificat is her song of praise after she's told that she's going to conceive the Christ child. And so then I start beating myself up even more because I'm like, okay, you got this unwed teen mother from the wrong side of town who's just told that she's going to have a baby. And I'm sure she's thinking about what the fiancé is going to think and what her family's going to think. And even in the midst of this, she sings this song of great joy to God. And so if she can deal with something that, life-shaking, overturning everything she probably had planned, surely I could put on a smile and sing some carols and be happy, right? But I don't think that's totally right. When we feel deep grief, it's not because we're the Grinch or we're Scrooge. It's because we're wounded. And wounds bring grief. Wounds need to heal, not just be ignored. Perhaps the wound is because Christmas serves as a marker in time, and we thought that this Christmas would be different. Last Christmas we had it in our head, a year from now, next Christmas, perhaps this will be. Perhaps we thought we'd be married, or have a baby, or a new job, or a place to live, or a car, or whatever it was that we put up in our head. There are reminders that it's Christmas time. It is impossible to escape, even if all we want to do is hide until the trees are put away and January safely arrives. Mary's Magnificat is one of the assigned readings for today, but today's also a couple of other things. It's December 21st, and so it's the winter solstice, which means that it's the longest night of the year. It's also the Anglican feast day of St. Thomas. Do y'all remember St. Thomas? He was one of the 12 disciples. Do you remember his nickname? Doubting Thomas. Yes. And so here's the story where Doubting Thomas gets that honor. Jesus has been resurrected, and this is where the story picks up. Thomas, the one called Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. The other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord." But Thomas replied, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, put my finger in the wounds left by the nails, and put my hand into his side, I won't believe." After 8 days, his disciples were again in a house, and Thomas was with them. Even though the doors were locked, Jesus entered and stood among them. He said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. Look at my hands. Put your hand into my side. No more disbelief. Believe." For Thomas, it was not Jesus' voice, or Jesus' memory of a specific event, or even Jesus getting in through a locked door that convinced Thomas that this was indeed Jesus. Instead, for Thomas, it was that he could see his wounds. Actually, not just see, but thrust. The Greek word is thrust. Thrust his fingers into those marks left by such awful pain and suffering. So it is the woundedness, the very vulnerability of the human Jesus that convinces Thomas of the divinity of Jesus. And I find that very interesting, that this fully human, fully divine person that we find in Jesus, quite frankly, why wouldn't he clean himself up when he gets resurrected, you know? Like, resurrected from the dead, you think he'd be all bright and shiny and healed up. But that's not what happens. Jesus still bears these awful, awful wounds from this awful, awful suffering. And it's through still bearing those wounds that Thomas comes to believe. And perhaps that also helps us to believe. 3 years ago was a magical time at Christmas for me. My second foster son arrived on December 1st. A Christmas with a toddler is oh so much fun. There was striped pajama day at the preschool, and you cannot imagine the little gaggle of one-year-olds running around in pajamas and how ridiculously adorable that is. There was the great Santa picture of the toddler screaming as I put him into Santa's lap. There was all the excitement from friends and family about having a little one in the house for whom they could spoil with all kinds of gifts. And there was just all of the excitement that came with having a baby around at Christmas. But then the next year there wasn't a baby. And the house was oh so quiet. And it was oh so sad. Now when you sign up to foster, you're signing up for grief and loss. That's part of the deal. And I get that. But as I dealt with all of the sadness, it resembled the death of a child. But it wasn't the death of a child. And so even though you get that you're signing up for this grief and loss, it's still grief and loss. It doesn't make it any less difficult to deal with. And so it was strange, and it was just a very, very sad Christmas. And even though I usually try to find something to hang on that tree to symbolize that year, I was at a loss for pain and suffering was real, and any facade of merriment and joy would not make it go away. And you see, that's the trouble with love. When you deeply love another, you're signing up for loss. Whether our relationships deteriorate while we're still in our earthly bodies, such as through the loss of a foster child, or divorce, or a physical move from one location to another, or incarceration, or addiction, or whatever it is that separates us from someone we love, grief is part of the deal. And even if we don't experience the loss of a loved one while we're both still breathing, our earthly bodies wear out. Death is inevitable. We leave this earth. And even though we hope to see them again someday, we miss them now. And so when our loved ones pass away, we're also left with that deep void of where that person once was. So if the Advent or Christmas season leaves you with these feelings, it's okay if you feel sad. I understand if you're just praying for January to arrive as quickly as the earth can possibly just go around the sun. That's especially understandable when it seems like everywhere you go, people are proclaiming that it's the happiest time of the year. And with all of the music and the decorations and the Christmas trees and everything, it's just almost impossible to avoid all of these different triggers for that grief and loss. But plastering on a smile is not the meaning of Advent. Just glossing over our grief is not what we're called to do. Advent is not about a facade of happiness. Advent is about hope. Real hope. Not cheap hope, but real hope. Hope that is born from God's great love, and hope that exists in the light, but also in the dark. Even during the very longest night of the entire year. Barbara Brown Taylor is one of my favorite authors, and she recently wrote a book, Learning to Walk in the Dark. In it, she explores how people of faith often fear the dark. For some reason, we do anything and everything we can to never go into the moonlight, but simply to sunbathe. In part of it, she writes, "Darkness is shorthand for anything that scares me, anything that I want no part of, either because I am sure that I do not have the resources to survive it, or because I do not want to find out. The absence of God is in there, along with the fear of dementia and the loss of those nearest and dearest to me. So is the melting of ice caps, the suffering of children, and the nagging question of what it will feel like to die. If I had my way, I would eliminate everything from chronic back pain to the fear of the devil from my life and the lives of those I love. If I could just find the bright night lights to leave on. At least I think I would. The problem is this. When despite all of my best efforts, and the lights have gone off in my life, literally or figuratively, and I have plunged into the kind of darkness that turns my knees to water, nonetheless, I have not died. The monsters have not dragged me out of my bed and taken me back to their lair. The witches have not turned me into a bat. Instead, I have learned things in the dark that I could never have learned in the light. Things that have saved my life over and over again. So that there's really only one logical conclusion. I need darkness as much as I need light. This past year was a difficult one for me. And when I reflect on it, I have been profoundly and gratefully surprised by the joy that I found in some of the most unexpected places. On one of the saddest days of my life, I sought refuge in a friend's house. And as I sat on the floor in a back bedroom, I was just consumed with my grief. Crying was awful. And while I was back there, just being overwhelmed with sadness, her adult autistic son came home. And he didn't know I was there. God's good creation, and we are human, and we are deep, and we experience all of these things. So just like the Christmas tree is filled with different things, we're also filled with different things. I read this poem this past week, and I think it fits this season well. The only road through the darkness and into the light, the only way to go over the river and through the woods to Grandma's house, or wherever we need to be for Christmas, is through the honesty of tears and grief, and the whole complex of feelings we feel, because we are alive and we have depth. And we need to winter as much as we need to summer. And we know that honesty about these feelings and this truth, not a mask of smiles and a facade of cheer, is the only way to true, deep, profound joy. Tonight is the longest night of the year, but it also means that the light just grows from here. And light always, 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 always overtakes the darkness. Amen. In just a second, we are going to have our invitation to the altar, but I'm going to issue another invitation to you as well. This is the longest night of the year. And if you need a way to make symbolize this year, whether it's happy or if it's sad or if it's a mix in between, we're going to gather in the Activity Center at 6 p.m. tonight and make those salt dough ornaments, with which I've already given you the recipe. It's on the back of your Christmas tree. So if you join us, if you join with your families, I hope you'll take the time to create a memory. The trees were given to you also, so you can write or draw or do whatever you want to do. So just think through how you're feeling